Today we're going to talk about the respiratory system. We're going to first start off by talking about the functions of it. It is mainly to provide structures and mechanisms for gas exchange, so the intake of oxygen and the elimination of carbon dioxide. It also helps maintain the body's pH, and also for respiration, which is the exchange of gases between the atmosphere, blood, and cells. So the organs of the respiratory system are our nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and our lungs. So as you can see again, we have the nose, the pharynx, larynx, trachea, and then down to the bronchus, and then into the lungs. So the respiratory structures, again, this is just an anterior view of the lungs. So you have the right lung, left lung. These are a lot of the arteries and veins coming off of the heart. And then down on the bottom is our diaphragm. So in our nose, it's basically composed of a nasal cavity, which is a large cavity containing the external and internal portion. It's divided into the right and left side by the nasal septum. And then the external portion is made of bone, cartilage, and skin. So in this picture you can see the top portion is bone, most of the blue part is all cartilage, and then it's covered by skin. It have a mucous membrane. That's what kind of helps keep our nose very moist. And then it consists of the nostrils or our external nares. And then the internal portion is a large cavity within the skull that connects the external nose to the pharynx through the two openings of the external nose. Functions of the nose is warming, moisturizing, and filtering the incoming air. It's also for smell, so a receptor of the olfactory stimulus, and also for resonating chamber for speech. Then it moves down through our pharynx, which is a funnel-shaped tube about 13 centimeters long. Extends from the internal nares down to the larynx. The wall is composed of skeletal muscle lined with a mucous membrane. And then it's also divided into three different areas: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. So you can see in this picture, it's basically named by what other structure it is located by. So for instance, the yellow portion here is the nasopharynx because it's where the nose, naso referring to nose, meets up with the pharynx. And then the blue portion is your oropharynx, oral referring to the mouth, where the pharynx and the mouth meet. And then you have laryngopharynx, where the larynx right in here meets up with the pharynx. The larynx meets up with the pharynx. So functions of the pharynx is the passageway for food and air, so it does have both, and also a resonating chamber for speech. Then we move down into our larynx, which is our voice box. So it's a short passageway that connects the pharynx with the trachea. So the wall of the larynx is composed of pieces of cartilage, one of them of which is the epiglottis, the epiglottic cartilage, which makes our epiglottis. And then it is made of thyroid cartilage, which creates the Adam's apple, and then cricoid cartilage, which attaches the larynx to the trachea. So in this picture, you can see this is the anterior or front view, and this is a posterior view. So epiglottis is right up here on the anterior view, and this big leaf-looking structure that you can see from the posterior view. This is what flaps up and down depending on if you're swallowing food or if air is coming in. Then right here, this is the thyroid cartilage, which creates the Adam's apple, which is more predominant in males than females typically. And then the cricoid cartilage, which is right here, that attaches to the larynx to the trachea. So we have the epiglottis, that large leaf-shaped piece of cartilage lying on top of the larynx. So the leaf portion of the cartilage acts like a trapdoor covering the opening of the trachea, which is called the glottis. So it flaps down depending on whether you're breathing. If you're breathing, it's open to allow air in. And then if you're swallowing food, and it closes to prevent food from going down into your trachea. So again, we can see here, this is a sagittal or a side view. This here is the epiglottis that closes over this portion right here, right over the glottis. So it closes it up so that the food or water doesn't go down your trachea. If it does, if this gets opened whenever you swallow, that's when you start coughing and choking because food in the trachea is not supposed to go there. So next we have the glottis. This is the opening from the pharynx to the larynx that contains the vocal cords. So vocal cords are made up of mucous membrane folds that extend across the glottis in 2 layers. So sound originates from the vibrations of these true vocal cords. So next, moving down, we are in our trachea. So it's a tubular passage about 12 centimeters long and about 2.54 centimeters in diameter. So it's anterior to the esophagus. So the esophagus is the tube that carries your food from the oral cavity down into your stomach. So it is in front of your esophagus. So it extends from the larynx to about the 5th thoracic vertebrae. So then the trachea branches off. It'll split into your bronchi. These are tubes that branch off of the trachea and extend into the lungs. So then they continue branching as they enter into the lungs into a structure called the bronchial tree. So you start off with your trachea. Then you go down into the main stem, which is your primary bronchi. Then you go into the secondary, or the lobar bronchi, and then the segmental, the tertiary, and then the terminal bronchioles, and then respiratory bronchioles, and then down into the alveolar ducts. They just keep on breaking down until they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So the bronchial tree, here's a picture. So here's our larynx, and then it goes, the air will travel down our trachea, and then it branches off into our primary bronchioles, then it goes into the secondary bronchioles, and then tertiary, getting smaller, and then continue on until it gets even smaller, all the way down until it gets to the alveoli. So again, this is an anterior view, the front view, and this is the diaphragm, the muscle that's right below the lungs that aids in the actual contraction and relaxation, which causes breathing, respiration. So then we have the alveoli. So this is the cup-shaped outpouching of the epithelial tissue. This is a place where the external respiration occurs, so the gas exchange between the lungs and the blood. This is the smallest form that gets down to very, very small. It's 1 cell thick. So the lung contains 300 to 500 million alveoli. The surface area of about 750 square feet, or about the size of a tennis court. So if you were to take all these little alveoli and spread them out, that's how much surface area would be in our lungs. There are a ton of them. So again, here's a little better picture of the alveoli. So it's very highly vascularized, obviously, because the gas exchange occurs between the blood vessels and the air that we breathe in. And so this is where all of that gas exchange happens. The O2, the oxygen, is picked up by the bloodstream, and the CO2 is dropped off and is allowed to be released whenever we breathe out. So then our lungs, these are paired cone-shaped organs that occupy most of the thoracic cavity. They're separated from each other by the heart and other structures. And then they are surrounded by a double-layered serous membrane called the pleural membrane. So the pleural membrane, it's basically broken down into 2 layers. So the first is the parietal pleura, which is the outer layer of the pleural membrane. It's attached to the thoracic wall. And then you have the visceral pleura, visceral meaning internal. So this is the inner layer of the pleural membrane. It's attached to the lungs themselves. And then between the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura is a potential space called the pleural cavity, which actually contains the pleural or serous fluid, which helps to reduce the friction. So whenever our lungs are continually expanding and relaxing, that friction that occurs when that happens, it helps to reduce it, so there's no damage done to the tissue of the lungs or the tissue surrounding the lungs. So here's an actual picture of a cross-section of like a transverse section of the lungs. Basically, they cut the person in half, you can see here. So this is the posterior of the back, medial, lateral. So this is the side. So out here, you're looking at the skin, tissue. Here's the lung, or sorry, here's the ribs, right in here, the rib cage. So this dark brownish purple thing, this is the actual right lung. And then this outer layer that's connected more or less right along the ribs, that is your parietal pleura, right in here. And then actually connected to the lungs will be the visceral pleura. And then this little black dark space in between them, that is your pleural cavity. So that's where that fluid will sit. That'll kind of help reduce the friction whenever these lungs are inflated and deflated. So it reduces any friction that might happen along here. And that is the end of our video.